Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Toby Demker. Thanks for joining us for another podcast where we pick a topic and see where the conversation takes us. We try to talk about personal development, professional development, organizational change, and a few philosophical topics. So we're here for another one today. How you doing this morning, Toby?
I'm really well, actually. It's end of November, which is should be the sort of the worst period in Sweden, but I think this November has been surprisingly good. So I'm just happy about things, actually.
Yeah, I love the seasons. So I really embraced fall when it came, and it's still pretty warm. So I'm thinking
Mm.
I'm ready for the cold now. I'm ready for the winter to set in. Obviously, I'm in the north of Germany, which is not Sweden. I guess you guys should be gearing up for snow soon, hey?
Yeah, we had a little bit. I think next week is going to be a proper winter finally. But I mean, even up here, we s- almost never have a white Christmas anymore. So.
Oh yeah.
uh,
Oh well. Okay. Well, before we talk about any weather or anything, let's talk about last our last topic was adding value, and
Yeah. You had
so
some afterthoughts on that, didn't you?
yeah, actually,
Sure.
I was thinking about it, and we talked a lot about how we add value, and I kind of tried to add the point about it's also about how you add value into your own life, like in the things that you let into your life, and I was thinking about that because I tend to I tend to fill my life up with a lot of doing, a lot of. I mean, I have a mindful practice. I meditate, but I find I was on a conference call with a larger group a while back, a number of months ago, and they were talking about the latest Netflix series, and I said. I don't have Netflix, and they're like, oh well, do you use some other streaming service? And it's like, I don't have a TV. And they're like, what do you do with your time? And so I end up I do a lot of online courses. I listen to philosophy lectures and stuff like that. But I think in this I wanted to clarify that adding value to your life isn't always about being productive 24/7.
Mm.
Having being present and just taking some time to relax is also adds a lot of value to your life. Really enjoying, like with you, enjoying time with your kids.
Mm.
For me, enjoying time in nature, or if I happen to have a dog at the time, really really being in the moment and enjoying those moments, that adds a lot of value too. So I guess
Mm.
I just that was what I was thinking about. It's not adding value to your own life with the things you let in, the people that you let into your life. Obviously, they should be qualitative, high quality moments, but also, you can just be quiet and present and enjoy the silence and stuff like that.
Mm.
So yeah. Anyway, that was kind of going through my head about the whole added value thing. It's not always about being super productive every moment of the day, and filling every moment up with stuff.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, because recently, not only recently, more and more, I just figure out that what people really need, or a lot of people that are really busy need, just to have a little bit of a time out now and then. So this habit of blocking some time in your calendar that is just empty for, I mean, and then what you do with it, I don't know if it's reflecting or just doing other stuff, or but just not having that I need to produce time. For a lot of people, I see that that is extremely value adding, and maybe the most value adding kind of activity during the week when you're not, when you don't have to produce or when you don't have to do stuff.
Yeah, I think the really productive CEOs will block, or high level managers will block time, creative time, or just
Mm.
space in order to reflect on, you know, get the holistic view of where their organization's at, or just the projects that they're working on, without thinking about them specifically, just kind of stepping back. Actually,
Mm.
it's funny because I've been listening to a couple of lectures from um, uh, I don't want to get his name wrong. It's Dr. Ian McGilchrist. He's a psychiatrist, but he
Hmm.
talks a lot about left right brain function, and contrary to sort of the way we've looked at it in the past, he talks about how you need both sides of the brain. They work together on a lot of things, like even creativity, because the right brain's kind of the creative side, left brain is the more rational side. But he talks about it as you use both sides for almost everything, but the right brain has more that holistic big picture, whereas the left brain is sort of that grasping, getting things done, and the reductionist kind of viewpoint and so on. And so I think when you can take that time and just kind of take a step back, you can take the whole holistic view. You can use more of your right brain, that kind of thing. So anyway, yeah. If anyone hasn't checked him out, I think he's just released an epic book that his previous book was 500-600 pages, and I think this new one's kind of this philosophical. Maybe it's his philosophical theory of everything. I can't remember the title right now, but I'm drawing a blank on it. But anyway,
maybe you can post it later.
Absolutely. Yeah, Dr. Ian McGilchrist, and you'll find his whole bibliography. But super fascinating guy to listen to. Cool. And read from. So anyway, to get on to our topic for today, before we digress, I was just talking to you before we started about my challenges in focusing sometimes. So you have a great topic for us today to jump into.
So my time to choose a topic, and something that has come up more and more and more and more in just conversations and in facilitation and in workshops that we're doing. And it's the subject is very simple: psychological safety. And what's interesting, so this started with, the word for me has been there for a while. I don't know exactly when I became aware of what it was, and I think the first time I came across it was probably through Amy Edmondson. She had a TED Talk, and she's been writing books, and I guess she's kind of the psychological safety guru nowadays.
I think she came up with the term, actually.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah. But for me, I started working with it more actively since one of my clients, they have this very, very clear safety first kind of culture, and they added psychological safety to kind of a checklist that you go through, and one thing that you need to check on when you're talking about safety, and that it's created a lot of discussion. It's created a very positive vibe in the organization, and a very really good boost to the whole organizational culture, I would say. But of course, it's interesting to see what does that actually mean, and what does it do to people? What does it do what does it mean for leaders? Because it sets an expectation and a little bit of benchmark of how you need to lead if you want to be role modeling what that means, and also for individuals and teams. So that's where I thought that we could go into, and also from another point of view, if I start with a model, then if we talk about Amy Edmondson, for example, she when she talks about it, it comes up a model of being in different zones while you're having two angles or two axles, and when you're talking about psychological safety on one axle and accountability and motivation on the other. And when I look at that, so many things for me make sense when we're talking about leadership, because very often when I facilitate discussions around leadership, it tends very much to be on the soft sides, and we need to be listening, active listening, we need to be understanding, we need to be vulnerable, so many things on the soft side, and creating this psychological safety. But then this axle of motivation and accountability comes into play, and it really balances things out in a good way. And I know that Amy Edmondson, when she's talking about psychological safety, she's very clear on that. It's not a space where you can whine or you can slack off, or it's not about, and that is in the model that's mentioned as the comfort zone, like where you're having a good time, you're talking about stuff, you're having a very nice atmosphere, etc., etc., but it might not be very productive. And for me, that's really comforting in one way. When you talk about leadership, you have to create a space where you can have that kind of atmosphere of speaking about everything, but at the same time you have to be very clear about motivation and accountability. What is expected here, and we're here to produce some stuff, and what needs to happen to get things done. And that creates that whole learning zone that she calls it. When you have both very high motivation and accountability and a very high psychological safety, that it's a zone where things happen, and it's very productive, and you're able to learn, and there's a sense of empathy, of course, and understanding there, and you're able to discuss things and criticize things in a good way. So for a high performing team, I mean, it's crucial. But then it's also interesting to see what happens if you slide down the scale, so to say. So we just talked about the comfort zone. At the same time, if we slide down and you're very hard on, or you're very clear on accountability, for instance, but you don't have that psychological safety, what that can lead to in terms of, I think she calls it the anxiety zone. So in terms of burnouts and stress and just a lot of negative aspects. So I mean, that's where I'm coming from with this. That I think it's really important for not only leaders, organizations, but also for individuals to think about, okay, so where am I, and what needs to happen to get into that learning zone. I think it's a really interesting topic.
Absolutely. There I think are a few definitions that I want to clarify on. Well, actually, I think you've done a pretty good job on it, because I think there's some confusion sometimes, and I'm glad you alluded to the whole, it's not like this safe space. There's a lot of talk about university campuses wanting to have their safe spaces, and I don't believe in those, because safe spaces mean, okay, in this space, this is the area where everybody's nice to each other, and then what happens outside of it, then everybody's brutal to each other, right? I think I think what you want to have is you want to have a culture of mutual respect and good communication throughout your organization or wherever you are. So having a safe space just doesn't, that's in conflict with, I guess, my values in terms of what I would want to establish within an organization. So I think psychological safety is, I think it's a cultural aspect, and I think it's very tied to trust. And I don't think it's just part of organizations. I think obviously with trust as the foundation, right? Because it's the kind of trust we're talking about in Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions model, where the trust is the foundation. It's that willing to be vulnerable, or being able to be vulnerable because you trust that you're not going to be attacked for it, and so I have some experience with like I worked for a CEO, which in my view was really a poor leader, or I guess very old school in his methodology. But there was a real fear, and there was a lot of not constructive competition. And I mean, just one example: sitting. I was giving a presentation, and the finance director asked a question, and the CEO says, "Yes, that was a stupid question." I mean, that's the opposite of psychological safety. If you're not I mean, there are no stupid questions. So if you're not understanding something and you're afraid to ask a question because you might look stupid, that's exactly the opposite environment that you want to have. So in that perspective, I think psychological safety, with this trust foundation is really important. And I think that's important in every kind of within families, within, groups of friends, within organizations. I think psychological safety is a really important thing. And you achieve that by having empathy, mutual respect, and so on, and holding each other accountable. What some people are striving for is this, not getting away from challenging yourself, surrounding yourself with people who all have the same opinion as you do. And I think that there are some people who promote diversity and inclusion, but for them, they want everyone to have the same opinion and same beliefs as they do.
Yeah.
So that's not what it's all about. So I think the thing that I really like to encourage is, a lot of my own philosophy is very much informed by some of the Buddhist and Stoic the Buddhist philosophy and the Stoic philosophers, in that, it's you need to, part of, obviously, in the environment that you create in order to create psychological safety is really important. I think within organizations, that can be done, and that's very much a leadership role and a cultural thing that you can develop. But for individuals, there's also taking that level of responsibility for managing your interpretation of things, how you experience the world, and so on. And so, the Stoics talk about how, you can't control the external circumstances. So focus on what you can control internally, how you respond to that. Yeah. And so, you know yourself in situations when you can escalate things by interpreting them the wrong way. And then so you take a situation where maybe there's been a positive environment, or there's all these things that try to encourage psychological safety, as you put it, but then it only takes one person to become confrontational, and all of a sudden the trust is gone and nobody's feeling comfortable anymore. So I think there's also the responsibility for how you respond to things that creates that environment, right? So it's the participants as well as the facilitators, I think, is a really important thing to look at.
I mean, it definitely goes both ways. I mean, I can definitely think about, if I think about some personal examples, and I think most people can relate to this. And this is interesting when you think about team dynamics, that when you enter a group that you don't know, sometimes you just feel at ease and you feel at home immediately, and sometimes that you have this, maybe not anxiety, but this worry, and you're not feeling this psychological safety. And what are the reasons for that? And I mean, it can be your daily form, just I'm not feeling that confident, or not knowing the expectations. I don't know, how are people, what are people expecting from me here? And also just about understanding what people are talking about, and the sort of the jargon in the room, or the things that people are talking about, and the way that the way you make jokes. I mean, me and my buddies in Uppsala, there's a particular humor that's going around, and if I would invite you over, and we would have this kind of jargon going on, I don't think you would understand what was going on. You probably wouldn't feel very comfortable, and I couldn't lay that responsibility on you. That's us as a group. How welcoming are we to other individuals? So of course you have to have some awareness about that. But as you say, also in an individual, how am I entering this context, this situation? And that can be super uncomfortable. Do you want to call that out? Like, well, sorry guys, I'm not understanding your jokes. That's not something that you really want to bring up yourself, right?
Yeah.
So
Well,
it can be very, very tough on the individual. So I would lay the responsibility on on the leader actually, and then on the leader or the group. But if we're talking about a working context, then it would be the responsibility of the leader to create this kind of environment.
Sure, you can lay down some guidelines, and I think we've talked about before. I do believe that culture is very much a top-down exercise. I think that leadership sets the example, drives the vision, gives the guidelines in terms of the kind of behaviors that are expected, and the behaviors will then are a reflection of the kind of culture that you have in an organization. So I think that foundation needs to be there, as with the example that I gave before. Obviously, that was there was a leader that was not creating an environment of psychological safety where people feel free to make comments that are constructive or ask questions. Look to clarify, look to understand. So obviously that's important. I think the things that we do have control over, though, is we can question how we're interpreting a situation. Some people are really quick to be offended, and they become defensive. I think trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, assuming the best is a really good practice, right? And you may be wrong, but I think that if you're afraid of coming across as naive, that's again going back to the whole Stoic approach. Well, that's your issue to confront. And so I think for individuals, what they can do is look at what's my intention here. Am I trying to provoke? And sometimes it's good to be provocative in a discussion, right? When you're trying to, challenge and provoke can be good, but it can only happen, as you say, within the right environment. So knowing that the person or the group that you're speaking to is not going to be taking it the wrong way, getting defensive, and so on. It's always about how do you keep a discussion constructive, and fair, and you can't have a constructive conversation if both sides are being defensive and attacking each other, right? It just doesn't get productive that way.
Yeah, sure.
So I think that's a really important point. But I think what I always come back to is this. Nassim Taleb, he coined the phrase anti-fragile, right? And I think that what each of us can work on is, facing challenges, both emotional and, the thing is, if we lower our standards to if we try and create an environment, so the shyest, most introverted, I think you have to create, it's important if you want to have a constructive, open discussion, you want to make you want to have even the most introverted, shy person be willing to contribute. But on the other hand, it's important to challenge people so they grow and become more confident and so on. I don't think you do that by being totally protective of everyone. So it's a very nuanced discussion, right? So about how to achieve that right balance. And so if we protect if we try and be too accommodating to everyone's sensitivities, then we're also not going to have a productive conversation, because we're so afraid of offending anyone that we can. There's the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. So finding that nuance and it's each individual's responsibility to work on their own level of fragility. So becoming anti-fragile. So sometimes you are confronted with uncomfortable things. Like, I'm not talking about, blatant discrimination or anything or offensive things. Those have no place, I think, in these kind of discussions. But I think there are things that where it's important to challenge yourself with ideas that are contrary to your own, and especially in a work environment or organization. I think those are some of the most productive conversations, right? And like I say, this diversity of ideas is really important, and learning not to take offense, and and trying to see the good in what the other, assuming good intent, and so on. I think these are really important aspects. So layered on top of this fundamental foundation of trust that's going to create the psychological safety, knowing that, and coming to the table where everyone has mutual respect, and those are the foundational things that you need to have there. And then you can have those kind of really open debates where people definitely have difference of opinion, but don't take it personally, right?
Yeah.
Go back to the four agreements.
That also, that also really emphasizes the need to sort of check the process. How are we actually feeling about this? Because I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. We don't have to be oversensitive, etc. But your emotions are your own. If you're feeling attacked, or if you're feeling uncomfortable or whatever, that's your right to feel that way.
Absolutely.
But then how can you make something constructive about that? How can you discuss it? Can you ask questions about it? What do you mean by saying that? Etc. And to have any kind of process check in order to sort of feel the temperature of that I think that's really important as well. And that can be through, I mean, there's many different ways of doing it, but first of all, just asking that question. So what's the temperature in the room right now? How are we feeling about this? Sure. Evaluating your meeting. So, how was this meeting? How can we make it more effective next time? If you want to give it a score or a happy face or whatever tools you have in mind. Also using check-ins. I think that can be very productive as well, to just you check into a meeting with how are you, what's your state right now, so everybody has that same awareness. And because I agree with what you're talking about establishing and developing the trust. And I think by checking process and progress, you're doing that, and then you can really lift what you can, or you can divide what you're talking about in terms of we're talking about this, about being productive, or to become more productive, or to look at different perspectives, or is it that we just have different ideas. Finding ways to raise that debate, or raise that discussion or conversation. How do you do that? And I think these are some tools you can utilize to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's well defined in Lencioni's model, right? Where he talks about trust first. And then the reason you need trust is because without it, then you have a fear of conflict, which means you have a fear of having a difference of opinion and debating that. And, and you can't debate that unless you have that trust, which is, I think, what the whole concept of psychological safety is all about, right? So, no, I agree with you there. I think it's just it's important, where sometimes people have this expectation that everyone needs to, they want the outside world to conform to their expectations, and that's just not possible, right? And this is where I'm coming from, this whole Stoic perspective, where we can't expect the world to accommodate us in every one of our sensitivities, or everything that we need and want. I think there needs to be a mutually agreed level of respect and empathy, and all of those good things that create a really healthy environment of trust and allow for really healthy communication. So I think,
and that environment needs to, in that environment, it needs to be some kind of instrument to check how we're doing then, right? Are you feeling safe, or are you not feeling safe? And I just want to highlight that. I think that's difficult, but it's crucial. I think it's really, really important.
So as a facilitator then, because, obviously trust isn't instant. You develop trust over time. So when you bring a new group of people together, do you have a means of what's your approach for creating that trust in the room, that psychological safety?
All right. Well, really depends on how much time we have, and also where the group is. If the group is newly, I mean, you. If we're just looking at Tuckman or Wieland, I mean, similar to Lencioni, looking at different stages of team development, you can see where the needs are, perhaps. And if it's a new team that is put together, then you start by self-presentations and laying down
Yeah.
ground rules and talking about the big picture and the goals. But if you're in sort of a conflict mode, then it's something else. Then you have to start looking about, okay, so uh, looking at individual perspectives and what are individual needs, what are individual assumptions, what are the commonalities that we're having, talk about roles and responsibilities. So it's different dynamics in these kind of discussions,
Yeah.
and maybe a little bit of a conflict resolution. And I think in this sense, I mean, talking about different kind of assessments of looking at your preferences and just to create a stronger mutual understanding, you can utilize these kind of things, right?
Yeah, I think obviously if you're going into a discussion where it's conflict laden, you know that it's a conflict resolution that has a much different dynamic. But when you have a group of people that you're bringing together, if it's a new group, well, regardless, if I don't know the group very well, for me, playing a game like Two Truths and a Lie or something, to see what the willingness is to expose yourself, to share something personal about yourself. And so I find that's a really good way to take the temperature of the room. But if you can, and this just doesn't have to be in a meeting or whatever, but anytime you're meeting in a group, people look for icebreakers, right? They look for ways to for people to let their guard down and to be willing to be vulnerable to some degree. And when you get people into that state, that obviously a level of trust develops, and then you have a more free-flowing conversation. I think it's intuitive for a lot of, well, at least for good communicators, to try and achieve that.
Yeah. And I mean, from if you're looking at models and theories, I think the Johari window is really, really useful there. I mean, the Johari window, I mean, just opening that arena of how much are you revealing about yourself, and how deep are you willing to sort of reveal your inner thoughts and what people might not know about you, and just having a discussion around that. So what are you actually willing to disclose and what are you not willing to disclose? And then having discussions about, but and then also benchmarking from from a leader perspective or a facilitator perspective, being benchmarking, like sharing something personal, that can go a long way, because it obviously has an effect if people start to share really personal stuff. Then okay, then I feel safe to do that as well. And is it okay in that forum to talk about my divorce? Okay, well then I can discuss that. And that's really, I mean, if you want to talk about developing trust, to share personal experiences that you might not have been sharing with others, that's a really powerful thing. But as you say, I mean, everything has to be in some kind of balance. I mean, if it's a psychological trauma, this might not be the forum, because nobody is qualified to handle it, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can give you a great example where it's just it's important to be respectful of what people are feeling and to understand the state they're in. I'll give you an example. There was I play basketball. Within the basketball team, there was a group, and there was a discussion about people were debating about making the vaccines mandatory, right? So so one of the players was quite emotional and said, I've been affected by this. I've lost 2 people to this freaking disease, right? So, and so obviously the emotion was there. There was a very personal experience. There was, first of all, a degree of vulnerability to say, look, I'm dealing with a loss here, and so obviously the approach to take here is not to go, yeah, but what about individual rights and freedoms? That person is not going to be willing to listen to that, and it's not really. that experience that they're having right now, this is not the right time. That what would be productive about debating a thing like that, even regardless of your personal views, when someone is willing to come to the table and say, look, I've lost someone, I'm hurting, and that's not the time to go, okay, well, now's my time to, well, forget about feelings, I'm going to bring my point home. And so for me, that was a good example of, well, let's read the situation, find some nuance, be respectful of other people's feelings, try to have some empathy, even if I have a difference of opinion, right? And so obviously that's a personal experience, that's a free time. That's why I say this whole concept of psychological safety can be applied to so many situations, right? And within family situations, when I think about when I was a kid, I not to get too personal, but I certainly didn't feel comfortable voicing my true feelings and opinions around my stepfather. I think nowadays a lot of that's changed. I'm sure the way you raise your kid, it was just a different generation, right? So the way you will, I think if I had kids, I would definitely want to try and foster an environment where they're willing to share everything with me, or as much as they feel, within reason.
Some things you don't want to know.
No, some things you don't want to know. But I think if they're having fears or concerns or anxieties, I'd love to be there to support them, when they're ready to talk about those things. So creating that environment of trust, so that you feel safe enough to be able to talk about those things, I think is really at the heart of what we're talking about, whether it's in business or private or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think most of us, maybe I said this before, but I think most of us can relate to situations when we're not feeling psychological safe and what it leads to. And so yeah, the from a top-down perspective, for the leadership to create circumstances for developing an environment where everybody feels accountable to contribute to this kind of environment or atmosphere. I think that's really, really, really important. And as you say, by being vulnerable, by having process checks, by being a bit personal, thinking about how being trustworthy, but also being constructively challenging. I mean, all of these transformational leadership behaviors really contribute to this kind of atmosphere. What I think is really interesting. Oh, maybe I could I was thinking about an example as well. When I was a student, I've always been playing football or soccer, depending on where you come from. And I moved to another city and I started playing for another team. And I played for them for 2 years and I never felt really comfortable there. And the coach and the trainer, lovely guy, really, I really liked him. But for me, it just didn't click into with that kind of safety. I'd never felt like, I never really understood the environment. I never really clearly understood the expectations. I never really clearly felt like I was a part of the team. Being an outsider from a different city, perhaps. And I think very often how that affected my performance. I'm not Ronaldo or Messi, but I'm an okay footballer, I guess. But I really felt like during my whole 2 years there, I was clearly underperforming, because there was always this doubt. Is this the right decision? Is this the right thing to do? And this little sense of doubt there had an enormous negative effect on my performance. So in the end, actually, I left the team, and I felt, finally, I'm out.
Yeah, I agree. I think it does so much to contribute to the type of culture that you have, the type of environment that you have, right? If you create a psychologically comfortable area, and by comfort, I don't mean. It's funny because I was having a conversation with my girlfriend this morning about comfort, and I think we understood it in a different way, or I intended it different the way that she meant it. But the thing is, having a level of comfort so that it's not like lackadaisical, but enough comfort to be vulnerable, right? So I think finding that nuance, I think that creates a really important thing. But I have the same experience in sports, except in basketball. Only I know that a lot of the issue comes from my own inner critic. Whereas my team is really supportive. They're very encouraging. They're like, "Come on, I know you can do this." And where as soon as I miss a couple of shots, I start to question myself. I get hesitant and so on. And in sports we talk about mental toughness, right? And so I think that's before what I was trying to allude to, that absolutely, from a leadership perspective or a facilitator or within an organization, creating an environment of psychological safety is really important. And then for individuals, taking on that responsibility and making sure that, am I being super sensitive? Am I taking this personally? Am I, am I putting words in the other person's mouth or so on, right? How am I perceiving this? So I think it's finding that creating the environment, and then the individuals also taking the approach of assuming good intent from the other person, rather than taking it as an attack on you personally, that kind of thing. So finding, creating a culture where individuals are also being self-reflective and going, how was this meant, or what was the intention? Trying to interpret too much into it is a negative thing, but also for participants, who have their own agenda, who are trying to manipulate the situation, create negative emotional situations. Those kind of people have to be held to account and put in check, right? So I think there's a lot of dynamics that need to be looked at, and if you can get people. Obviously, if it's a team, you can start to develop that culture. But if it's people coming together in a group, there's you've got time constraints, right? And so being able to facilitate that. So it's when you recognize that someone seems to have an agenda and they're provoking other people. I find as a facilitator or as a leader, you can really start to ask questions to that person who's trying to be provocative, so that they're forced to clarify themselves in a way that is not attacking, but is more trying to clarify, right?
Yeah. And for me, that's constructively challenging. And I'm not really sure, what's going on here. Could you just develop your thoughts there a bit more? What's the purpose or whatever? Yeah. That's super interesting, because I think we're very often, or mostly, we're thinking about psychological safety from that perspective of how can we create this, how can we create circumstances to develop our psychological safety. But that individual perspective is really interesting, and I really buy into what you're saying about how can we, as individuals, contribute to this, and what is our responsibility and accountability to things. But at the same time, I'm recognizing the difficulties with that, because when you're in an emotional state and you don't feel safe, it's very difficult to climb over, or to take that view, to get on the balcony or whatever you want to call it, to look at, okay, what's going on here? How am I reacting to this situation? So for ourselves and for the leaders, or for other team members perhaps, to create and allow space for that. I think that's really important. Also, looking at the leader of, or sorry, the ladder of inference. How are we looking? What are we reading into things? To using that kind of mindset. Okay, so I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm listening to your words, and I have my assumptions about what you mean about this. Creating dialogue around that. What are you reading into this situation?
Yeah, and I think
it takes a certain amount of maturity, I have to say.
Absolutely, it does take a level of maturity, and I think that's where, as a leader or a facilitator, you're assessing the people in the room. But I also, to your point about when you can visibly see someone is becoming uncomfortable or upset or whatever, it's giving that person the space to share their feelings. I would, when you see someone visibly, well, I guess if you know them and you know they're introverted and they're uncomfortable talking in the group, you can pull them aside later, or in a break. But if I feel it won't put that person on the spot or make the situation worse, I will, hey, listen, do you have a response here? Do you have a question? I wouldn't go straight to how they're, you seem to be upset about this. I would go, do you have a question about this? Or is there something that you're not sure you're understanding correctly? Just, I think that's where you say, you having the right process or having the right leadership skills. If you're a leader in a team, and you can see one person is visibly provoking another person, or maybe not even intentionally, but there's someone getting emotional in the room. I think it's really important to create that space and allow that person to also be able to speak, because there are people in a group dynamic that will dominate the conversation, and so that's where you have to become a bit more of a moderator and facilitator in the room. But I think when you get into those kind of practices and processes, that will allow, so when people remember, oh yeah, last time we met, everybody had the opportunity to speak. And even though this one person had a very strong view, this other person was given the space to be able to share their opposing views, and given the support in order to do that. I think then you start to have an environment where you can have really constructive conversations. And I think that's what psychological safety is really all about, right?
Yeah, well, again, it comes back to the atmosphere, or to that learning zone that we call it, where you can have an atmosphere for discussing things, for learning, but also I think this is really important, to bringing up mistakes, and that's part of the learning process, of course. But and if you look back at Amy Edmondson's book, I think that's where she started, right? Like the most high performing teams had the most mistakes. They revealed the highest amount of mistakes. Of course, that doesn't mean that the lower performing team didn't have any mistakes, but how do you lift or reveal them, or look at them? So, looking at what we're not doing right, and wanting to fix them and to learn from that. I mean, that's maybe not also always so fun to talk about how many mistakes we've done, but it's, if you want to progress and develop, that's important.
Absolutely, and I think that comes down to that level of trust, right? Because that's what we talk about in trust. It's the kind of trust where it's like, hey, listen, I made a mistake. I acknowledge that. Or and this is how I'll do it different next time, or whatever. But people being willing to go, yeah, that was on me, or willing to take responsibility, and recognizing that that's not going to be punished. That kind of behavior, when you stand up and go, yep, I made a mistake, and I know that was the wrong thing to do. And obviously, if someone has a track record, then you have a competency issue, not a vulnerability issue. But when people are willing to do that needs to be encouraged. And I think that again, that's part of developing that right kind of culture and mindset in order to achieve that kind of outcome. I had something else to add, and it'll come back to me in a second. So back over to you.
Well, I was thinking also that we could go back to that part of maturity.
I just remembered, but go on.
All right, let's come back to your point in a second. Because if I'm looking back at, okay, for instance, the situation when I was a student, I probably, hopefully I was a lot less mature then, but for me to feel psychologically safe might have been, it would be a much higher threshold to get there than what it would be now. For me, at the, I'm twice double the age, and maybe I don't have to care so much about certain things, or maybe I don't care so much about how other people read me or view me, or my kind of agenda, or maybe it's also just my sense of my sense of self-security, but obviously I think personal development and personal maturity have a very big effect on how your individual perspective on psychological safety.
Yeah.
So having that as in mind as well, so it's maybe easier for a senior manager that has been working in their organization for 30 years to feel safe about things rather than the freshly graduated individual from wherever, you know.
Yeah, that leads very well into the point that I actually that I drew a blank on for a second there, because I think this is an important thing that I emphasize also with people in their personal relationships, but it's this need to be right, right? If we can let go of the need to be right, and it is a maturity thing, but it's some people just, they can be senior citizens, and they still haven't learned this whole, it's I have a colleague that that it's just these people that need to always have the last word, when it's like you don't realize that your argument is not even making any sense anymore, but you just have to have the last word and you have to be right. And I think this is it's in terms of communication, it's such a destructive thing, right? You won't engage, and you won't encourage people to engage with you if you're not willing to admit that okay, I see your point, and we can agree to disagree, or yeah, actually you're right. People who aren't willing to acknowledge that the other person has a valid point makes for really unconstructive conversations. And so there was just one specific person that was coming to mind that's why that came up. But that is a level of maturity, but it's not something that, especially when people are insecure in their position of power, they feel like they've got to impose their will on other people, and that's something that works against psychological safety, right? That's something that undermines it, where people are just, well, obviously afraid to voice their opinion, but they feel that they have to, and this is that CEO that I mentioned earlier on. I mean, there's a reason why, for the most part, he was surrounded by yes men, in the executive team, and so this can be a real problem. So when you and sometimes when you start to, I think celebrities have a problem with this, or these superstars, sports stars and stuff. They are surrounded with people who are afraid to tell them what they really think, and so that's really unpredictable for organizations, for leaders. If you have a bunch of people who are intimidated by you, and then they won't point out, like it's like the emperor's new clothes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you have no one that's willing to tell you that, hey, look, listen, that idea is stupid. Okay, that's not psychological safety, but people are willing to go, listen, have you thought that through carefully? Because in my view, there's a few weak spots or something like that. If you can't have that ability to say that to someone who's in a position of power, then the culture's wrong. There is no psychological safety there.
Yeah, and that brings the attention to the importance of asking questions. What do you actually think about this? What did I learn about this? What have I learned today? I mean, if you're looking at your example of a person who always needs to be right, for that person to reflect on the question, what did you learn? You can always learn something, but if the answer is always, no, I didn't learn anything, I know everything, then that would be an interesting discussion to develop further. The importance of asking questions, and also to highlight and benchmark the importance of, I know Simon Sinek did a talk about this, being the idiot, right? So always asking, being the idiot in the room, and ask questions that I don't understand what this means. But just always asking questions for the sake for you to understand, to make everybody understand, and allow for different opinions and perspectives. I mean, for me, that's an extremely good way to create a psychological safety, that you don't have to understand everything, and show that you don't understand everything, and but also that you're willing to learn. and talking about that learning zone, I'm asking questions because I want to understand. I want to learn more. I want to know what you mean and what you think about this.
Absolutely. It's Stephen Covey's 7 habits, right? One of them is
Mm.
seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think
Yeah.
what you're saying there is a perfect way to read the room. Are people asking questions? If people are
Mm.
asking questions, then that's the right level of inquisitiveness. That's not being afraid to ask a stupid question, but also wanting to understand where other people are coming from. If you
Mm.
have a room full of people that are yeah, but, and then interrupting and trying to get their point across without really fully listening to the other person, then that's not creating the right environment, right?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, interesting. I think I got some inspiration for a project here. I don't want to get into it because I drew a blank there, and I was thinking away. Something needs to be done about this. Maybe I'll come back to that at a later stage. But
Okay, but I think sort of to sum it up, well, for one, psychological safety is a really important cultural aspect of any organization. I think that's
Mm.
fundamental, and it comes down to do we have enough a level of trust that people are allowed to admit when they make mistakes, ask questions when they aren't clear on something, even if they feel like it might be a dumb question. I always as soon as someone says this might be a stupid question, right? You can already tell there's this they're asking the question, but they're already prefacing it with this it's probably going to be stupid, and that's where I try to jump in right away. There are no stupid questions.
Mm.
Just ask your question. You don't need to qualify it. Everything's fine here, and I think those are important cultural things to bring into play. And again, because I come from a coaching standpoint, it's not just all about business. I think there's so many of these things that we can bring into our private lives and to benefit our
Definitely,
relationships
yeah.
and so on. So I think if you are in a personal relationship, whether it's romantic or otherwise, and you're sensing a distance, that there may be a level of trust there that's gone missing, right? And that's another sign of, well, I don't feel safe. I find this, people who've been in a relationship for many years, it can be a family dynamic. It can be,
I
all of a
was just
sudden,
gonna say,
yeah,
yeah.
you'll have a parent and an adult child who, well, why didn't you ever tell me this? Well, because I never felt, comfortable, safe, and
Mm.
so I think these lessons can be applied to so many areas of our life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I I completely agree. And I mean, you were taking an example with your stepdad about psychological safety, and we're talking about this maybe more in an organizational context. But imagine, yeah, for families, if you're in a family situation your whole life, and you don't choose your family, you can't quit well, you can, I guess, but it's much more, it's easier to change a job than to change your family, so to say. And if you're not feeling psychological safe within that environment, what kind of repercussions or effects is that going to have? So, but also what you're saying about choosing or reading the situation and choosing when and how you should approach the situation. If you're in a conflict and maybe it's not a good if you're in a conflict situation and you're having a beef with your stepdad, maybe that's not a good time to talk about psychological safety. But at another situation, having that conversation or looking at a process of how can you discuss, well, how can we improve our psych, not using those words, but in essence, how can we create a better situation, a better environment, a better um, conversation atmosphere within our family, or within our relationship or whatever it is. I think that's, if you bring it out down to family perspective, it's much closer to us, but maybe it's even more important because you are with your family all the time, and to be able to feel psychological safe there, wow, that's
Well, those are some of the
mm,
most important people in your life, right? So
yeah. Mm,
if you don't feel comfortable and safe in that environment, then what's that going to do to you psychologically going out into the world?
mm,
But I think the sort of what you were pointing to actually made me think about when people are in a position of power, that's is exactly the time when you want to be thinking about this kind of thing, because how does it benefit you to intimidate others? To there are people who thrive on that kind of power, right? Authoritarian kind of, they want to silence other people. They want to force their agenda, their opinion on others. But we all know those aren't the kind of organizations that thrive. Those aren't the kind of environments where you have happy families, or interactive, thriving kind of organizations. And so if there's a person in power that really kind of dominates and suppresses the ability to have conversations, or people to voice their opinion and or be authentic. I think about in situations, when you think about the situations like you talked about in your sports team. I think when you get in a situation where you don't feel like you can be yourself, you can be comfortable. For me, this is a really good sign of when. When I'm with people, even if I've only just met them, if I feel really comfortable being myself, then I know that that there's a real connection there. But when you kind of sense that you're being judged, or people are being very forceful with their opinions, so you're like, if I know that if I'm going to say this or that's going to trigger them, then there's a distance there. There's a barrier, right? And the only way to bring that barrier down is to is for both sides to have some sensibility and understanding for each other, some empathy and some self-awareness, right? What are the things that I'm saying? How are they affecting the other person or the other people in the room? So if you find yourself to be, really controlling a lot of conversations, or for some people that feels very empowering, and they feel like the most important person, everybody's listening to me, or I've got the say here, they have to listen to me. I mean, obviously those aren't very mature, evolved leaders, but I'm just saying that those are especially the people that we need to encourage to reflect and go, just because, and just to go back to the example of my stepfather, I mean, he was in the military, so that obviously, and had his own very strict upbringing, and so without going into too much detail there, but obviously we all have our history and the things that we learned from that, and so your parents are doing the best they can with what they know how to do, and so are your friends, and so are your colleagues, and it's about meeting people where they are, right? So.
Adam, you have, like it or not, you set your own expectations, and you put your as a parent, you put your expectations on your kids, probably.
For sure.
And are those always the best for that individual? And it's really interesting questions to think about. But also, how what kind of conversations can you have with kids about these kind of things, and how can you asking questions about how they are feeling? It's super, super important, but it's not necessarily easy.
Yeah. And for someone like this is an area I'd like to take my coaching in, because I used to work. I used to be a volunteer basketball coach in Canada, and that was super rewarding, and that probably started me on the whole coaching career, because finding that these kids were looking for someone to mentor them and talk to them outside of just basketball. They had one or two, and that was super rewarding. And I think that's what kind of, I know that was a big part of what got me onto this path. But I think especially with young people, and because I'd like to dedicate a certain amount of my time, because it's not obviously not the most lucrative work to be doing, but I'd like to spend a part of my time working with young people to help them find their own potential, right? And so that's a challenge for me. How do you that dynamic where you're the older person, they have whatever picture of who you are, and what level of respect they have to show you, and so on. But then how do you meet them where they are at, and create a space where they're willing to sort of expose themselves and tell you what they really think and feel, and so you can try and help them maybe see things see if they're seeing things from a healthy perspective, that kind of thing. So yeah, there's just so many elements in life that you can use these tools and create a much healthier, better environment for communication, right? Does that seem like a good place to wrap up for today?
I was just thinking, is that where we should finish our discussion for today? But I guess so, yeah. We've covered a lot on psychological safety, and I think for me it's really interesting to think about it from these two perspectives of how I traditionally look at it, from a leadership perspective. How can we create the circumstances for psychological safety, but also from the individual perspective. So what can I do to make sure that I feel more safe? What is my own level of awareness, and how easily offended am I in certain situations, and what can I do about that? I think that's a really important and interesting perspective I will take with me.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to remember that you don't want to live in an echo chamber of people with only your opinions, or create a bubble so you're not confronted with anything that you find contrary to your own beliefs and values. I think, if you're willing to share, you may be able to bring people closer to you in your way of seeing in your values, because they in the way that you share your ideas with them. So I think that in the polarized world we're living in, it's really important for us to find more community. We certainly have far more things in common than we do have differences, and we tend to focus on the things that separate us. And I think that's kind of where I'd like to leave things off, is look for the things that you have in common with people rather than the things that separate you, because we look so much first at the things what make us. Some people go, oh yeah, like they look for those. If they're trying to build a relationship, they look for the things they have in common. But if they've already decided that person is different, they don't even want to try and find any kind of commonality. And I think that's. Try and find, if you're finding adversity, or you're finding conflict with other people, trying to have that empathy, looking at the world through their eyes, but also trying to find at least one thing that you have in common with them, because we all throughout the world, I've traveled the world a lot, I've visited so many different cultures, and I will inevitably find something I have in common with a person from a completely different culture. And I think that's an attitude we could use more of in the world, hopefully.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's where my mind goes a lot these days, why are we focusing so much about the things that we don't have in common instead of vice versa?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what we could establish and develop from that. So yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great thought to end the conversation. Everyone out there, be good to each other. Look for things you have in common, and hopefully that will help make you feel safer in the world and others as well. So with that, we'll wrap it up. Thanks again for everyone for listening, and hope you can join us again soon. Again, if you have any comments or feedback for us, you can reach Toby at through his LinkedIn page, Tobias Demker, and me at my website, peterteuscher.com. We look forward to any kind of feedback, positive or negative. We're definitely open for critique. This is a psychologically safe space to ask your questions. All right. So until next time, Toby, it's been great having another conversation. Take care of yourself. Talk to you soon.
Well.